May be put on any proposal at the request of any senator. There being none, before I call the Leader of the Government, I wish to advise the Senate that I have received a number of letters and messages from presiding officers on behalf of their respective parliaments, and in particular Senates and other upper chambers, expressing their sympathies to Australia in relation to the bushfires. I table the letters for the record of the Senate. Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I seek leave to move a motion of condolence relating to bushfires to take precedence over all other business for today.
Leave granted. Leave is granted. Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I thank the Senate. I move that the Senate, 1, acknowledges the devastation across our nation occasioned by the bushfire season, including the loss of 33 lives, the destruction of over 3,000 homes, the unimaginable loss of so much wildlife, and the devastating impact on regional economies across Australia. 2, extends its deepest sympathies to families who have lost loved ones and to those who have suffered injuries or loss. 3, places on record its gratitude for the service of David Morrissey, Geoffrey Keaton, Andrew O'Dwyer, Samuel McPaul, Bill Slade, Matt Kavanagh, Ian Macbeth, Paul Hudson, and Rick De Morgan Jr., firefighters who have lost their lives during the fires, and extends its deepest condolences to their families. 4, recognises the contribution of thousands of volunteer and career firefighters and the dedication of emergency services personnel across Australia. 5, honours the contribution of 6,500 Australian Defence Force personnel, including 3,000 IDF reservists, and the work of Emergency Management Australia throughout the summer. 6, recognises the generosity of individuals, families, schools, churches and religious groups, service clubs and businesses from across Australia and elsewhere in the world during the evacuations and following the fires. 7, expresses its gratitude to Australia's friends, allies and neighbours who provided or offered support. 8, recognises the unceasing efforts and close cooperation between state and local governments, demonstrating the strength of our federation. And 9, commits itself to learning any lessons from this fire season. And 10, pledges the full support of the Australian Parliament to assist affected areas to recover and rebuild. I move the motion. Mr. President, this summer our great nation has faced unimaginable adversity and trauma. Uncontrollable and devastating bushfires challenged us to the core, bringing death and destruction to communities around our wide brown land. But, Mr. President, through such terrible adversity and trauma, we have seen the courage and spirit of the Australian people soar higher than any flames. What we have seen is that when the people of this nation are challenged, they rise to that challenge and overcome it. They show the sort of spirit, perseverance, bravery and desire to prevail that defines Australia and all Australians. This is not the first time, nor will it be the last time we face such challenges. But what we have seen shows that as a nation, as a people, we will always come together in times of crisis. Mr. President, this nation mourns the loss of 33 people, the destruction of over 3,000 homes and devastation of wildlife, parts of our environment and farmlands. 9 brave firefighters paid the ultimate sacrifice while battling these blazes. They were loved and admired by those closest to them, their families and friends, and are now revered by an entire nation. Many members of the families of the Australian firefighters who died are in this building today, welcomed by the Prime Minister in the other place. They've been joined by the Ambassador of the United States, Ambassador Culverhouse, representing the 3 American families who have also lost loved ones. Jeffrey Keaton and fellow volunteer Andrew O'Dwyer from the Horsley Park Brigade died alongside each other fighting the Green Wattle Creek blaze. They were mates and both also new dads. We lost husband, father and grandfather, David Morrissey, fighting a fire in East Gippsland when the vehicle he was travelling in rolled over. We lost Samuel McPaul, who was just 28 years old and married to Megan for just a year and a half. Megan is expecting their first child. Devoted father of two, Matt Kavanagh, had been a member of Forest Fire Management Victoria for 10 years and was extinguishing unattended campfires on the day he died. We also lost Bill Slade, who had been involved in fire management for 40 years. He'd fought Ash Wednesday fires back in 1983. And we honour 3 American friends who were lost to us when their C-130 Hercules aircraft crashed while defending precious lives and homes. They were Captain Ian Macbeth, First Officer Paul Hudson, and Flight Engineer Rick A. De Morgan Jr. The members of all 9 families now know that they have been embraced by this nation. We grieve with them and today offer them comfort and support. Some of those family members are just children, too young to understand why their dads have not come home. But we know that one day that a young boy or girl will want to know what their father was like. They will come to learn that their dad was among the best of us. They will learn that their dad was willing to put his life on the line and pay the ultimate sacrifice to protect his community. They will learn that their dad was honoured by a grateful nation. Mr. President, I have been informed that all 9 firefighters will be nominated for the National Emergency Medal, and I can confirm that Her Majesty has agreed to amend the criteria for the National Medal to be awarded posthumously. The National Medal recognises a long and diligent service by members of eligible government and community organisations who risk their lives to protect or assist the community. It is awarded after 15 years of service. The change agreed to by Her Majesty will allow the National Medal to be awarded to those who died in service and who would have reached 15 years of service if not for their death. This amendment will be retrospective to the creation of the medal in 1975, meaning that others who have died in service will also be eligible. Mr. President, as well as the 9 firefighters, we also acknowledge and remember the 24 other Australians who were tragically killed during these bushfires. Many of them were killed trying to defend their homes or helping defend their communities. Some were just trapped in the wrong place at the wrong time. They no doubt were loved and cherished by their family and friends and will leave their own legacies within their communities. Mr. President, the remarkable actions this summer have not, of course, been confined to those who have lost their lives. We have seen courage, vigilance and exemplary service by tens of thousands of firefighters and other volunteers. Ordinary Australians have stood up in the face of adversity and done extraordinary things. They were joined by over 6,500 IDF personnel, including 3,000 reservists, who were called out to assist in difficult and dangerous work. They have all acquitted themselves magnificently, and we can be so proud of their efforts. People have travelled half the world to help us in our time of need. Offers of support have flowed in from around the world, from governments, private organisations and individuals. In total, 70 nations offered us assistance. We have welcomed to our shores over 300 firefighters from the US, Canada and New Zealand. Military assistance was sent from Korea, Singapore, Japan, Papua New Guinea and Fiji. Australians are eternally grateful, but none of us more so than those directly affected. People whose homes are no longer standing have had their spirits lifted and hope restored by the generosity of our global peers. Financial aid, firefighting support, defence personnel, aircraft and other specialist equipment. We have received these offers of assistance and more. We owe so much to those who have travelled from afar to help protect our communities, our towns and our people. Additional offers from more of our international partners remain on the table. It has been comforting and reassuring to know we are not alone in this. Our overseas posts are working actively with foreign governments and business organisations to provide them with an accurate picture of the bushfire situation, guiding them on how best they can help. Support has also come from within our own community. Firefighters travel from all around our nation, including my home state of Western Australia. Our charities have been overwhelmed by donations. The Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul, wildlife groups such as Wires and so many more. Indeed, Australians have felt the warmth and generosity of so many. It has come from the wealthy, the famous, big and small business, but most importantly, generosity has come from everyday Australians, mums and dads and their kids, giving whatever they can to help their fellow Australians in their time of need. That is what our country is all about. And we also know that the people who have been directly affected by this devastating summer of fires need all of us to stand with them for the long haul. Mr. President, we have a long road ahead of us. The priority across all levels of government in Australia continues to be the emergency response and to ensure the safety of affected communities. The fire season in Australia is still ongoing, and we expect that there will be challenging periods in the coming months. Australia is a resilient country, but the challenge of rebuilding following these fires will be significant. It will take time, and we need the same courage and spirit we have seen so far to continue into the future. We need Australians and our international friends together on this. The government has allocated an initial $2 billion under a National Bushfire Recovery Fund to undertake recovery, rebuilding and resilience activities. The fund will be coordinated by the National Bushfire Recovery Agency, which will coordinate a national response to rebuild communities and livelihoods. The money will go to families and their children, small businesses and our tourism sector. It will help primary producers affected by the fires. Funding will drive mental health initiatives and support rural financial counsellors. Local governments and charities will be supported, and programs will be funded to support our wildlife in their recovery from these fires. None of this will be easy, but we will stay the course. We will stand with those who are suffering and help them rebuild their lives and their communities. Mr. President, we will also heed the lessons from these natural disasters. We know that climate change is making our summers longer, drier and hotter. We know that we have to be better at adapting to this changing climate and become more resilient and responsive to it. Draft terms of reference for a Royal Commission will be released in coming days. The Royal Commission will shine a light on what needs to be done to make our country safer and our communities more resilient. We must learn the lessons from these fires. We must do everything in our power to protect ourselves from similar conditions in the future. The best way we can honour and remember the Australians who perished this summer is by heeding those lessons. So, Mr. President, as I speak in this place today, fires still burn in various parts of our country. We know that the danger of this summer has not ended, but we know from what we have seen of the Australian spirit so far this summer that those dangers will be confronted with bravery and endeavour. We know that Australians will continue to come together to help each other in their time of need. Today, Mr. President, we come together to mourn, to honour, to remember and to reflect on the devastation this summer has brought to our nation. We embrace those who have lost so much, and we commit ourselves to helping them rebuild their shattered lives and communities. We commit ourselves to honouring the courage and the spirit of the Australian people.
Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since we last met in this place, our nation and our people have faced and are facing an unprecedented trial. So today, in this national parliament, we acknowledge the dread, devastation and loss of this summer. We honour the courage, humanity and resilience of our fellow Australians. We honour them in the words we say, but more importantly, we must honour them by our deeds and by our decisions. And what we have been going through as a nation must be a catalyst for doing things differently. Poignantly, as we meet today and reflect on the catastrophic fires that took lives, destroyed homes, livelihoods and habitats, the nation's capital, where we meet right now, is engulfed in smoke and may yet be further threatened by fire. I begin by acknowledging the unfathomable loss so many of our fellow Australians have suffered. And I want to pay my deepest respects, and I know those of all of us here, for the profound sacrifice of our emergency workers. So many volunteers foregoing their work, putting their lives on the line day after day, day and night to protect the families and communities they love. So to you all, the thanks of a grateful nation. The numbers are stark and the human toll is crushing. Across the country, 10.5 million hectares burnt. Tens of thousands of livestock perished. An estimated billion animals have been affected, killed by fires or indirectly by lack of water, food, shelter and related threat of predators. And as yet untold damage done to our already struggling economy. Mr. President, over 3,000 homes destroyed, and most tragically, 33 people have lost their lives. 25 in New South Wales, 5 in Victoria, 3 in South Australia. 3 of those who died were volunteer firefighters and 3 were the American crew of a Coulson C-130 Hercules large air tanker. It's difficult to know what to say in response to those facts. We know we can never repay those who gave their lives fighting these fires. We can but honour. We can but mourn, and we can but offer our heartfelt sympathies to all who love them. In my home state of South Australia, some 185 houses have been confirmed destroyed this season. The fires have burned through more than 300,000 hectares, businesses have been devastated, extensive road closures remain across Kangaroo Island, and most tragically 3 people have died. Ron Selth was a well-known and much-loved member of the Charleston and Greater Adelaide Hills community. They found his body at his Charleston property in the aftermath of the Cuddly Creek bushfire. I know how much he is missed, and I know he was a much-loved grandfather. The Lang family lost their father Dick and younger son Clayton. Dick Lang was an experienced adventurer, tour operator and a bush pilot, larger than life. Clayton Lang was one of Adelaide's most respected plastic surgeons, both adored by family, admired by their communities. They died on the Playford Highway in the centre of the island, where they had been trying to get to safety. And I offer again my condolences to all their loved ones. It was the selfless commitment of our firefighters, our volunteer firefighters and our emergency personnel who risked everything and in doing so saved hundreds, perhaps thousands more lives. Last month I was privileged to visit the Cuddly Creek Brigade of the CFS at their station, a brigade which, like so many others across our nation, have spent their summer, their holidays, battling blazes for weeks on end. The brigade captain was the first responder and quickly realised the scale of what they were battling. The benefits of investment by state governments in state-of-the-art equipment was clear. Their appliances equipped to protect the crew in the event of a burnover, with pumps that can be operated from within the cabin, curtains to protect occupants from the extreme heat of the fire, and oxygen masks to keep the crew breathing as the fire passes. But it's also clear Our volunteers make do with substandard tools and facilities more generally. The appliance at Cuddly Creek is too high for the 60-year-old station. They use a broom handle to prop up the garage door to get the truck out. The cruise lounge is a small room fixed to the side of the station, which is a shipping container, purchased using funds they raise themselves. And the air conditioner that keeps them cool on the extraordinarily hot days is so loud they have to turn it off when they want to talk to each other. But you know, they didn't complain. In fact, they made clear they weren't asking for personal financial assistance, but they wanted to be able to do their job. So our selfless volunteers shouldn't have to make do without the tools and facilities they need to keep us safe. As Mr Albanese has said, we must be ready. We know that bush businesses and producers have been hard also by the bushfire crisis. In the Adelaide Hills, Jan Simmerlink Allen's Barrister's Block Winery is just one example. It came close to complete destruction. The cellar door facilities were saved by her neighbour and the CFS, but pretty much all of the vineyards are gone. Jan, as tough as ever, has vowed to rebuild. And on Kangaroo Island, the grief is deep, and the timeline to recovery will be a long one. The island is home to the world's purest population of Ligurian honeybees, but the trees that feed the bees won't flower for 7 years. Tourism infrastructure, recently upgraded through private and government investment, has been destroyed. Thousands of livestock gone. It's a small community, isolated from the mainland, and the scale of destruction and loss at times must feel insurmountable. I do want to recognise in this place the great work of my colleague and the state member for Mawson, Leon Bignell. He's been on the island pretty much throughout the bushfire emergency, and he's demonstrated the leadership Australians expect of politicians. He's been on the ground with his community, he's grieved their losses with them, and he's gone in and provided practical help. Because communities do come together and are coming together and looking out for each other. Katie, a bank branch manager on KI, devoted to helping not just her customers but anyone on the island needing advice or assistance. Adam, a local businessman in Lobethal who swung into gear at the height of the crisis in the hills, pulling together a team of volunteers to run a relief centre in his town. Marie and Beck at the Kangaroo Island Community Centre, helping out with the daily essentials and to provide us support, a hug and a chat for locals coming to terms with their loss. And the army of volunteers giving a helping hand. Our many public servants, hard-working, ensuring victims have the services they need, and of course our ADF personnel and reservists providing so much support and boots on the ground. We thank them all. And what I saw throughout my state is the grit, resilience, generosity and compassion that is intrinsic to the Australian identity. As the opposition leader remarked, in response to the worst of Mother Nature, we have seen the best of human nature. In speaking of Mother Nature, we of course have to acknowledge the reality of climate change. Because if we're going to be honest, we have all seen this coming. In the Senate on the 26th of November 2009, I said this: we are also likely to see an increase in very extreme fire weather days. This is one of the effects of climate change documented again by the Bushfire CRC, the Bureau of Meteorology and the CSIRO in 2007, when they said that very extreme fire weather days now occur on average once every 2 to 11 years at most sites. By 2020 they may occur twice as often, by 2050 4 or 5 times as often. You see, we have been warned time and again. But instead of acting responsibly, too many have played short-term politics. A price on carbon, which was reducing emissions and driving investment in renewable energy, abolished. Climate Commission abolished. And funding to prepare Australia to adapt to the climate change we couldn't avoid was cut. As the Climate Council said, as a result, Australia is less prepared to cope with the impacts of climate change. Mr. President, at a time of national crisis, Australians look to their national leaders. They don't expect government to fix everything, but they want government to be informed, to be prepared and to act. Australians expect leaders to have compassion for their struggle, empathy for their losses, and they hope that their leaders stand with them There has been understandable disappointment with the government's response, and today isn't the day to deal in chapter and verse all the ways in which Australians feel let down by Mr Morrison, but we know they have been. What Australians do want is real, sincere and honest leadership. So I hope that we can all demonstrate in this place the sort of leadership and selflessness we have seen time and again from our emergency services personnel, from our volunteers, from all those who have come together in this tragedy. Today we can acknowledge the heroism and grief of Australians in our words and our contribution, but the truest acknowledgement will be in what we do. The Australian people have once again shown their courage, their integrity and their humanity in this crisis. Let us all show them the same.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, President. Our hearts break for the tragedy that our nation has just endured over the summer. This devastating fire season, which started just days out of winter, has demonstrated the reality of the new normal, the climate emergency that Australia is now facing. Summer, which used to be a time of joy and relaxation, has become a time of terror and great loss. Our deepest and most sincerest condolences go to those who have lost their lives and to the loved ones that they've left behind. Our hearts go out to the families of Bob Lindsay and Gwen Hyde, Vivian Chaplin, George Knoll, Julie Fletcher, Barry Parsons, Chris Sava, Jeffrey Keaton, Andrew O'Dwyer, Sam McPhail, Robert Salway and Patrick Salway, David Morosi, Mick Roberts, Fred Becker, Matt Kavanagh, Bill Slade, Ron Self, Dick Lang and Clayton Lang, 10 more people who are yet to be identified, and of course the 3 American aerial firefighters Ian Macbeth, Paul Clyde Hudson and Rick A. De Morgan Jr. We offer condolences to everyone that's lost their home, that's lost their business, whose communities have been ravaged over and over again, who continue to carry that mental and emotional devastation as they now try to rebuild their lives. It's right that we recognise them today and that we redouble our efforts to support that community recovery. The Greens also wish to pay tribute to the phenomenal efforts of our paid and volunteer firefighting and emergency services personnel. They have worked tirelessly for months on end to defend life, property and land, and it is only because of their bravery and courage, showing the best of what Australians can be, that these fires and the results of them have not been much worse. They are heroes. We support the granting of that National Emergency Medal that the Leader of the Government in the Senate has flagged. That is appropriate. More needs to be done to support these heroes. The best way to pay tribute to those lives that have been lost and all of that emotional and physical toil and effort for those who've spent their whole summer fighting these fires will be to start this parliament tomorrow working on a real plan to reduce emissions and to transition to a coal and gas-free future. These fires were unprecedented, but they weren't unpredicted. Scientists, economists, community leaders, emergency services experts, they all warned the government of these risks and the need for action many, many months before the crisis began to unfold. This government ignored them, and it now offers thoughts and prayers. That is not enough. Communities are anxious and they are angry. They're struggling with what the climate emergency means for them and their future, and they're feeling despair at the government's inaction and lack of compassion. A survey released today shows that the majority of Australians recognise the serious threat climate change poses to their future, and they want this government, this parliament, to show leadership. And yet we have government members who don't accept the evidence. It's on TV again last night. Well, I'd like to remind the Senate of what the evidence actually is. The first serious fires of this season broke out in September in my home state of Queensland. We've had almost continuous fire warnings since then. That is 5 months of devastation. The physical toll is great, but the emotional and mental toll is crippling. We've had 33 people killed, and this fire season is not done yet. We've had more than 11 million hectares of our country burnt. We've had more than 3,000 homes destroyed. We've had hundreds of thousands of people evacuated and then re-evacuated. We've had hazardous air quality that have kept people inside and put many vulnerable Australians at risk. Some of us smelt the smoke last night. And Canberra has not yet been devastated like other parts of our nation, but we can feel that this is happening. Now is the time to do something about it. But this government wants us to adapt. It wants us to adapt to this being the new normal. Well, we cannot adapt while there are plans to open new coal mines, keep coal-fired power stations open longer and extract more gas. How can that be your answer to what this nation has just endured? We cannot protect Australia's communities from more summers like this without serious climate action. Throughout this entire fire season, we Greens have been criticised for raising coal and the role that coal and fossil fuels is playing in making these fires worse. But if now is not the time to talk about what the emergency service personnel and the climate scientists are saying is making this situation worse, when is going to be the time? If not now, when? The world's watching and the community is begging for genuine action from this government. Australians deserve better. This government needs to act on the climate crisis, and if it won't, it needs to get out of the way. We saw yesterday, and in fact is the reason why we won't get real climate action, because people in this building are beholden to the donations that they get from big fossil fuel companies. It's very telling that in the lead-up to the election, there was $1 million donated to the big parties by big oil, big coal and big gas. That's on top of the $8.2 million that they've accepted since 2012. And I can see people are feeling a bit uncomfortable about this, but we will continue to raise the fact that democracy has been sold out. That is why we have no climate policy in this country. That is why the country has just endured the most devastating fire season that we have yet seen. Didn't escape anybody's notice that Adani and their associated bods gave almost $250,000 to this government in that year before the election. And in fact, an amount was donated to this government just 4 days before the Minister for the Environment signed off on the final groundwater management plan for Adani, which was needed for it to proceed. And a further $100,000 was donated just in the weeks after that decision was made. Santos didn't hedge their bets. They in fact made large donations to both sides of politics. And hey presto, now they're going to be the beneficiaries of the Prime Minister's announcement that they want to push open the gas fields in Narrabri against the very strong community sentiment that want their land and water and their climate protected. Of course, we know that Clive Palmer wants to open up the Galilee Basin. He made some very generous donations, but he's amidst Woodside, Chevron, the Minerals Council, Appia, and this is on top of the revolving door between ministers, advisers and industry. When politics is run by fossil fuel money, it is not hard to understand the failure to act. Throughout the summer, the Australian community once again demonstrated their generosity and their strength of spirit. They volunteered, they donated their time and their money to assist affected communities and to support firefighting services. The value of our charity sector and the strength of our community is unparalleled. But should the community really be paying for this? Fossil fuel companies have made a lot of money creating the climate crisis. It is about time they were made to pay to clean it up. Nobody wants us to have to start every parliamentary session like we're starting today. I hope that the horror of this fire season serves as a turning point, not just for our nation but for this government to actually listen when the community stands up and demands action. We had 23 former fire chiefs begging the government last year for a meeting. They couldn't get one. They were punted about to various other ministers. They were clearly saying that tackling climate change requires rapidly and deeply reducing greenhouse gas pollution here in Australia and around the world. And they said that we've got the solutions at our disposal. We just need the political will to get on with the job. Our party has that will. Our parliament needs that will. And we commit to honouring the memories of those lost in these fires by progressing a Green New Deal to ensure that we can lead on the climate emergency, that we can listen to First Nations' deep wisdom on caring for country, and that we can support communities and provide hope that the future can be better. Thanks.
Senator McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr President. Today I rise on behalf of the National Party to acknowledge the awesome contributions Australians have made in defending lives and livelihoods as this horrific bushfire season continues. Our deepest condolences are to those families who today are without their loved ones as a result of these fires. 33 Australians have tragically died. Others here have spoken of the loss of flora and fauna to our nation. The loss of life in our rural and regional communities hits home hard. They lost their lives putting themselves on the line to protect others. These men characterised the Australian spirit, loyal, hard-working, courageous men who, as cattlemen and timber workers, appreciated the harsh environment this fire ravaged. They were good men protecting their local patch, and all of us sympathised with their families. Over the past month, because these communities are also our communities, National Party MPs and senators have been in these communities thanking and spending time with volunteers, emergency service personnel, sitting with the families who've lost husbands, sons, daughters, sisters, brothers. North East Victoria, Tallangatta, Cudgewa, Corryong, Myrtleford, Tallangatta, Walwa. In Adelaide Hills we saw the impact on Woodside, Lenswood and Lobethal. Visiting Batlow, meeting the local IGA owners Sam and Ying, and learning about that broader impact, I think, that the fire has tragically had on communities and individuals. In Bega, Bambuka, Cobargo, I think was probably a very challenging but also uplifting experience to be with the dairy farming family whose father and grandfather had perished. And instead of being able to grieve, they had to get the cows milked that day, they had to get the fencing done. They were hard-working and generous in the very heart of the fabric of the Cobargo communities, Patrick Solway and his father Robert. But the uplifting thing about the experience in Cobargo was what a rural community can do when it is so challenged. And without state or federal governments, this community came together at the local showground and supported each other through very, very tough time till real support could actually arrive. And that generosity of spirit and commitment of the Cobargo locals to help their neighbours was incredibly inspiring. I just want, I guess, to share an experience of one of these small communities called Walwa in the Upper Murray in my home state of Victoria. So after the horror of the bushfire proper, Walwa was cut off from the rest of Australia in every single sense. No landline or mobile communications, no electricity, closed roads, no news. They couldn't even receive the ABC emergency broadcasters. But theirs is a story of resilience which has played out countless times across Australia over the last couple of months. It's a community built tough and practical. So they used old-fashioned UHF radio, word of mouth. They organised daily community meetings at the Walwa pub for updates. and it was a pub with literally no beer because they had no electricity. Towong is a rugged part of the Upper Murray and home to so many small communities like Walwa that were cut off and seeking to rebuild. Rural farmers are also volunteer country firefighters. And like hundreds and hundreds of farmers and small business operators across Australia in recent months, they've worked hard at home, preparing their properties, protecting their homes, their sheep and their cattle. And then they pulled on a uniform and worked with their local volunteer fire crew to protect their neighbours' farms and businesses, often returning home to devastation at the home front. Just like the Walwa CFA Captain Dave Hannon, it's a one-unit CFA brigade. They worked night and day for days on end to protect their town. One tanker manned by volunteers, and support crews came and went, but the Walwa volunteer crew worked on and on. There were homes and lives to protect, and the spirit of Australia, exhausted as it was there in that little town. So I salute David Hanna and his crew as examples of the brave men and women who worked so hard and saved so many lives and saved so many livelihoods as a result of their work. We salute our volunteer firefighters and emergency service personnel. We salute the fabulous volunteers across the country for your unwavering commitment to protect your fellow Australians, the Red Cross ladies at the relief centres, and the generosity of Australians in the very urgency of that disaster. But even today, rocking up to do fencing, etc. We want you to come back out. We're not broken. We need you to come back out into our communities and help us with the task of rebuilding our economies and our communities. There'll be lessons learned so we can be better prepared and better equipped for the next fire, just as we learned and adapted when bushfires took the lives of 173 Victorians in a few hours on a ferocious Saturday afternoon almost 11 years ago. But unlike that day in February 2009, these fires were not isolated to a region or a district. These fires were felt the length and breadth of Western Australia, from Queensland to Tasmania to South Australia. More than 18 million hectares burned. And here around Canberra today, still the country's burning. Thousands of homes and buildings, millions of domestic and wild animals lost, businesses lost, incomes, livelihoods and lives lost. Rebuilding these impacted businesses and communities will take an intentional and coordinated approach. And just like Captain David Hanna and his Walwa crew, Australians are tough and practical. There is a job. Our government stands ready with state governments and local governments to assist those regional communities rebuild. And our thoughts and prayers are with the families of those who've lost loved ones in this tragedy.
Senator Griff.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak in support of this condolence motion honouring the many lives lost over the course of an unprecedented bushfire season. A season that will be remembered as one of the longest, most ferocious and most devastating that Australia has ever endured. As a nation, we are still counting the horrific cost of this bushfire crisis. The human cost, the economic cost, and the cost to our environment and our unique landscape. Over 11 million hectares have burned and are still burning. Around 1 billion native animals have perished and 3,000 homes lost, with that number sure to grow as damage assessments continue. There have been devastating impacts to livestock, farming infrastructure and prime agricultural areas across the country. And too many businesses, particularly small businesses, the backbone of our regional communities, have perished in the fires or are very much on the brink. Workers who have lost jobs due to the bushfires and their families are also facing dire circumstances, and they very much need to be properly supported by government. The scale of this crisis requires not just an adequate response, but a response by government that allows workers, businesses and communities to recover with dignity and without unnecessary hurdles placed in their way. To do any less would only compound the trauma and mental anguish that so many are living through. The full cost to our communities won't be known for some time, and there is much rebuilding, regeneration and ultimately reckoning to come. Today we pay our deepest sympathies and mourn the terrible loss of life across Australia. 33 lives have been lost over this catastrophic summer in tragic circumstances, and many more have suffered terrible injuries from the fires. Almost a third of the people we have lost were volunteer firefighters protecting vulnerable Australian communities from the onslaught of towering walls of fire. We owe them the deepest debt of gratitude. To all the firefighters and first responders who have worked tirelessly throughout this summer, we thank you. We acknowledge the enormity of what you have had to deal with and will continue to deal with, bearing witness to scenes that can only be described as apocalyptic long after the fires have extinguished. While the devastation is widespread, it could easily have been much worse if it had not been for firefighters' heroic efforts as they battled dangerous and shocking conditions to save homes and lives. South Australia lost 3 of its sons in the fires that devastated Kangaroo Island and the Adelaide Hills. Today, I want to pay my respects to the Self and Lang families from my home state in South Australia, who are still coming to terms with the loss of their much-loved family members. Ron Self died on December 20, defending his Charleston property in the Adelaide Hills from fires that broke out at Cuddly Creek and quickly spread in blistering heat and strong winds to Lobethal, Lenswood, Woodside, Harrogate, Charleston, and nearly everything in between. His family have described Mr. Self as a loving and optimistic and generous man who valued his relationships with family and friends more than anything else. Mr. Self built a highly successful engineering business that contributed to the design of thousands of buildings in SA and many in the Adelaide Hills. He leaves behind his partner Susie, his children Johanna, Luke and Jasmine, and their partners Lachlan, Joe and Scott, and his 6 grandchildren. On Kangaroo Island we lost pioneering outback pilot Dick Lang and his son Clayton, who lost their lives helping battle the ferocious bushfire that tore through the west of the island, burning most of the pristine and world-renowned Flinders Chase National Park. It was a fire so ferocious it was described as virtually unstoppable. A well-known adventurer, Dick Lang was a beloved bush pilot, described as a modern-day Indiana Jones, who very much opened the outback to tourism in 1965 with his wife Helen. Together they started Desert Trek, their weekend 4-wheel drive safari business that began with day trips to the Flinders Ranges, which grew to longer trips exploring the notorious Birdsville Track and Svetleki Desert. Desert Trek became the biggest 4-wheel drive adventure company in the world, with 10 Land Rovers, a large bus and 2 aircraft. More successful businesses followed that saw Dick Lang embarking on tours and safaris around the world. Such was his love of adventure, desert landscapes and the uniquely beautiful Aussie outback. Dick's son Clayton Lang was a leading Adelaide plastic surgeon specialising in reconstructive hand surgery. The highly respected surgeon worked in both the public and private sectors, and like his father, he lived life to the fullest and was described as having a larger-than-life personality. Dr. Lang was a senior staff specialist at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Woodville and had a private consultancy. He set up a combined clinic managing advanced melanoma surgeries and trained future plastic surgeons. He still had way more to contribute and will be sorely missed by his colleagues, patients and family. Dr. Lang leaves behind his wife Christy and 2 young daughters. The father and son are described as having Kangaroo Island in their blood. Such was their passion for the island and how entrenched they were in the local community. They died trying to protect the community they loved. We honour these men, pay tribute to them and pay our sincere respects to their families. We will continue to honour their memories by embracing the community in which they lived and very much contributed to as passionately and as enthusiastically as they did. What was once farmland, forest or vineyards is now just charcoal. The swathes of blackened earth, a terrible reminder of catastrophic climatic conditions that have devastated much of Australia. We can help by not turning our backs on the fire-ravaged communities around Australia, and particularly in my home state, in the Adelaide Hills and on Kangaroo Island. Instead, we can turn out in droves to help in the clean-up, visit and buy their famed produce at the farm gate, cellar door and elsewhere, or at the local supermarket. Each and every one of us can help in the rebuilding of fire-affected towns and communities, even in small ways. With those words, I commend the motion. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. It is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly. These, Mr. Acting Deputy President, are the words of the late American President Teddy Roosevelt in his capacity as a servant to the people of the United States, and they bring us to a stark reality. Many of us can never know what it is like in the arena of firestorms, which have been a relentless presence in many Australian summers. These people face walls of flame soaring hundreds of metres high, which threaten to engulf the firefighter, neighbour, children, property, much-loved farm animals, our treasured native bush and human communities. Only the people in the arena can know. Only they know the desperation to protect their property, community and kin, while others choose to be the critics from the comfort of the stands. I can only imagine the enormity of feelings these people must have been through. The overwhelm of fear and terror, the confusion and fog from unrelenting tiredness, the depth of grief and gnawing of profound loss of life and property, the elation of success on one day and the anguish from losing the fight on another, the tears of others and the tears welling up within, the exasperation of defeat from hot days and changeable dry winds, the gratitude and love from those unknown, met for the first time and never seen again. And each morning, the sense of hopelessness and despair for many on how to rebuild. The human spirit that built your families and communities will build them again. Please pause to appreciate the huge reserves of courage, strength and tenacity. We are in awe of humanity's mettle. These wretched fires, as with many catastrophes, shows us the depth and breadth of humanity, some of which we marvel at, and some of which leaves us in despair. As I stand in our national parliament today, as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I applaud our men, women and children across many communities who are in that arena. One of Mother Nature's most extraordinary events, an unrelenting and horrific firestorm. And it is these people that we honour today. Your exhaustion, sadness, and perhaps anger now must be compelling and overwhelming. And my heartfelt condolences to those families who have lost their loved ones. The heartbreak must seem all-consuming. To all these people, there are no words, Madam Deputy President, adequate enough to convey my deepest sympathies to you and your communities. Yet I know that what we do now as a nation will matter the most in showing you our genuine support, our solidarity, our care and our dedication to helping you rebuild your lives. We know that we cannot rebuild upon condolences alone. We must also find that which we can honour, indeed celebrate. And we have countless tales of courage, bravery and tenacity to celebrate. To the men and women of these communities, what you have spent decades building has been destroyed in a few minutes by a fire you may never forget. I can never know how it felt facing the walls of fire that reached according to one friend in the Snowy, a harrowing 500 metres above the ground. Your survival shows you would have reached deep into reservoirs of true courage, grit and determination. It is the extraordinary nature of the human spirit that soars to heights greater than any firewall, that show us what we are truly capable of when the situation demands it. You honour our humanity. You inspire and uplift us all. Like the radiant heat that is so intense it ignites cars 300 metres from the flames, the human spirit is invisible. Yet like the radiant heat, the human spirit can be felt and it carries with it enormous energy. The human spirit cannot be quantified. It is imbued, it is resilient, it connects, it encourages, it overcomes, it restores, it re-energises. The Australian bush breeds and trains firefighters like nowhere else in the world. As a nation, we rightly have faith, respect and pride in our firefighting brigades. The iconic Australian eucalyptus that find their way into our stories and poems as the simple gum tree, with their frequent shedding of oily leaves and long streamers of bark acting as conduits for fire upwards, are masters of creating the fast-spreading crown fires in the upper story. This year, as in years past, many people have witnessed this roar through our forests. And if that wasn't enough, the flammable oil combined with the tinderbox of litter can turn a small ground fire into a terrifying firestorm of exploding gums in just a few minutes. And many have shared with us first-hand accounts of this happening. This is the nature of the beast that our valiant Australian firefighters face when they front up every day. We come to sit at our desks while they face infernos, defend properties and protect life, and in some cases go home to find their own property reduced to ashes. These selfless acts keep us indebted to our firefighters. And they also share in the deep pain and loss when colleagues do not make it back. And I honour the work of our Defence Force personnel who have been eager to complement the work of the emergency services in all communities. You are a treasured resource of our nation, and we all rest easier knowing of your dedication and loyalty to our country's well-being. Our international colleagues who have come thousands of kilometres to face these infernos with us, thank you. And my deepest condolences to your families who have lost loved ones fighting alongside our own. I pay tribute to the many children who have witnessed not only a firestorm, but how a community can galvanise in the face of tragedy. These children have their own tales of loss, survival and bravery. They have been the most vulnerable to the feelings of fear and psychological trauma. They need to feel safe again. Let us remember always that it is our children's stories that are carried forwards for future generations of Australians to listen to, as a poignant reminder of the nature of this land we all love so much. During this harrowing summer, there are many examples of extraordinary generosity, including businesses who have given freely to their communities, donations of money, accommodation and household essentials, and our wonderful wildlife rescuers. As we start our own rebuilding, so is the bush regenerating. Right now, the seeds of our gum trees, having been roused by the fire, will be nurtured by the ashes and will rise like a phoenix and outcompete all else. Fresh, tender shoots are already emerging, and we will have our eucalyptus forest back, because this is Australia. The loss of wildlife has been devastating, and as they have done many times over millennia, our fauna and unique ecosystems will regenerate alongside the rejuvenating bushland, because this is Australia, and it has a long history of natural weather extremes and devastating bushfires. We owe it to the Australian people to chart a steady but swift course for recovery. We must recognise that our landowners, our farmers and our Indigenous communities have the most knowledge of our country and its weather. These people are the best custodians, the best environmentalists, the genuine environmentalists, the best ones to listen to. We must listen to them because the fires will return again and again and again, as they have done for millennia. and yet again, and it will be their loved ones and their livelihoods on the line, not ours. It is only the magnitude of the fires that will vary. It will be up to the fortitude of politicians to stand in the face of the critics and to champion policies based on enduring knowledge, physical measurements, physical evidence and common sense and local experience. Now, I acknowledge there is an enormous weight of responsibility upon the shoulders of our leaders, from the Prime Minister through to the local mayors and councillors. Those who walk among the ashes are people who many politicians will never meet, from communities they will never visit. And these people are relying on us to support their optimism and their will to wake up tomorrow, hoping they have the resources to rebuild. They can rightly demand visionary leadership that leaves them feeling emboldened, shows them compassion, nurtures unity and gives timely and practical support. As the stories of peril and devastation slowly fade to make way for the next media story, I ask that we, from all levels of government, who are the key decision makers for rebuilding, ensure that these valiant men, women and children do not fade from our hearts and minds. And to be sure, we are reminded, ironically, fire rages on the outskirts of Canberra as we come together here today to pay our respects. We as a nation will thrive only when we bring all those people, businesses and communities with us. And there will be time for examination and analysis later. For all of us in Parliament, the gravity of the decision-making for now and later is immense. Let no one waste the time of these people who have fought in the arena, who are in pain and who need our support. They have not the energy, nor the patience, nor the personal reserves left to cope with bureaucratic nonsense. The Australian people need their servants to be unified and to be of genuine service. They want us to be fair dinkum and to give them a fair go. To all in the arena, we give our condolences, respect, support and thanks. Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Payne.